Hi, I'm Matt Littman, Executive Director of 97%. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. We have our congressional panel coming in a few minutes, hosted by the great Jessica Yellin. Some of you may know that Speaker Pelosi is making an announcement now about her future, so that we hope that we have all of our panelists. Not 100% sure, but we should. So I also just want to talk about 97% itself for a minute. So 97% was started by Adam and Stacy Miller, and we launched a couple of years ago. We launched it with keeping in mind that there are a lot of great people doing work on all sides of the gun issue, but we felt that a majority of the people were not being heard. And when we talked to people like, for example, Police Chief Bill Bratton, one thing that Bill Bratton emphasized was that he felt that gun owners were the missing piece in the gun debate, that they basically agreed with non-gun owners on a lot of these issues. And so we went about doing research on this, first hiring the firm SS&K, then Beacon Research in Boston. And we found out that that's true, that 86% of gun owners, for example, favor background checks, that a vast majority of NRA members favor background checks, that most people favor red flag laws, but that gun owners felt that they weren't being heard. So, and the reason for that is that gun owners would say that they often do not trust politicians, and they're often spoken down to by the media. So how would we get them involved in this? And so through our research, which is really where we focus, we've worked with Beacon, as I mentioned, and SS&K in New York, and you'll hear from Dr. Michael Siegel at Tufts today. And we do that research on gun owners. I'm not going to give away the findings that Dr. Siegel is going to discuss in a little bit, but we do that research and then we provide it to anybody who's interested, whether that's legislators, whether it's law enforcement, whomever it might be. We also make sure that we're doing things in a very bipartisan fashion. And if you look at our advisory board on our 97%.org website, you'll see that we have, for example, multiple Republicans, 2 former NRA lobbyists in our organization on our advisory board, one of whom is coming up right here, Congressman Joe Walsh, as well as Congressman Seth Moulton, who's also on our advisory board. And we talk about these issues to make sure that everybody knows that this is where gun owners are on the issue. Now, what people choose to do with that information, legislators, I can't say. That's up to them. But our job is to provide that information to people. And we do that through things like this conference, this panel that Jessica Yellin is hosting, things like our TAG podcast series, where we talk to people. You'll see later on, we'll have people such as Amy Swear from the Heritage Foundation, and Fred Gutenberg will be joining us. And that's what we do. So I'm going to give everybody a couple of minutes. We're going to turn it over to our next panel that Jessica's hosting. And I'll be back on with you very shortly. Thank you.
Hi, thank you for having me for that introduction and for the opportunity to have this discussion. I'm Jessica Yellin. I'm the host of News Not Noise, and I'm here today because 97% is doing important work to bring people together on the gun issue. And a perfect example is this panel. I don't know if we have everybody here quite yet because Speaker Pelosi is, I think, on the floor right now, announcing her intentions, whether she will remain speaker or not. So you'll get some breaking news in the course of this conversation, but I'm very happy to say that Congressman Joe Walsh is here right now already. Congressman, thank you for your time this morning. Can you?
There, I'm unmuted.
Great.
Janet, it's awesome to be with you.
Thank you. Thank you. It's Jessica. I always say that because people,
Jessica, thank you.
The Treasury Secretary is Janet Yellen, and I always wish I could, control everybody's financial situation. We're also going to be joined by Congressman Seth Moulton and Congresswoman Madeleine Dean. And let me ask both of them to show their video when they're here. I believe that they are on the floor, waiting for Speaker Pelosi's remarks. And again, we'll let you know what happens when that happens. Go ahead, Congressman Walsh, I'd love to start with you while we're all here. This is an especially timely panel because we've just had the election. We now know that Republicans take the House, Democrats hold the Senate. There are tiny majorities on each side. So the real question is, on gun issues, what can we expect from this next Congress? I thought I'd just leave that open to you first, and then I have a more pointed follow-up.
That's Jessica, thanks. And it's an easy answer, nothing. I don't think anything will get done in the next 2 years on guns, on healthcare, on climate, on anything. My former political party, politically in the House, is just hell-bent on investigating stuff and probably trying to impeach a bunch of people. So I don't think when it comes to policy, a Republican-led House is really going to do anything on any issue, which, by the way, Jessica, I think gives organizations like 97% a good 2-year opportunity to keep doing what they're doing to be ready, hopefully post 24.
Mm. Well, let's talk a little bit about both what they can be doing and what you think is feasible for this Congress. You know, I noticed that Senator Elizabeth Warren teamed up with actually Congresswoman Dean to send a letter urging bank CEOs to adopt a new code for gun and ammunition retailers. You know, we have 45,000 gun deaths a year. And what members of Congress are doing are writing to private sector leaders, asking them if they can do something about it. Do you think that's the kind of influence we can expect Congress to exert going forward? And would you like to see more actions like that? And would you like to see outside groups pressure Congress to take more actions like that?
Jessica, any and all of the above. Again, politically, this next 2 years, because of what happened a week ago, especially in the House, is just going to be chaotic. But trying to pressure legislators on gun issues and trying to work on the margins when it comes to gun reform issues is huge. Again, positioning to be in a better spot politically after 24. Let me make a couple of other points, Jessica, if you don't mind. Look, that's why, and I know that history is being made on the floor right now, and Nancy Pelosi is announcing her intentions, which is why my co-panelists are not here. That's all great stuff. But Jessica was right at the top, everybody. That's what makes 97% so cool. You talk about a diverse coalition. I'm not just a gun owner. I'm a former Republican congressman. I'm not a moderate congressman. I'm a conservative congressman. And when it comes to guns, Jessica, I've got a record as like a hardcore gun rights supporter. So for this organization to be able to put myself and Democratic members of Congress on their board, advancing a whole host of different reforms is really huge. Final thing I'll say, Jessica, is this. I do believe that for any legislation to advance, big or small, gun owners, especially gun owners on the right, really not only need to be at the table, but they need to be leading it. And I think we've got a great opportunity right now in this country for that to happen. Gun owners, I know because I hear from them all the time, are every bit as pissed off and angry about gun violence, about mass shootings, and they're demanding we do something. And as someone who used to bow a little bit at the NRA back in my past, and I don't anymore, most gun owners in this country, Jessica, are really fed up at some of these gun groups, especially the NRA, who have no interest in advancing anything.
So what is the way forward, given this setting ahead of us with this divided Congress at a time when you think the Republican House won't be able to advance meaningful measures? Is there space for small policies, or what do you mean when you say 97% can set us up for after 24?
Well, I think, again, strategically, but and 97% has put forth the research that backs this up. You want to bring even crazy gun owners like me, responsible gun owners like me on the right and all over the map, together with people who want gun safety legislation. If you want to bring us all together advancing stuff, the sweet spot is to focus on doing all we can up front to make sure that somebody who shouldn't have a gun doesn't get a gun. Focus on that, universal background checks, gun permits, red flag laws. everything we can do up front before a gun is bought. Gun owners, Jessica, overwhelmingly support almost all of those reforms. It's when you instead look at gun reform legislation that might impact current law-abiding gun owners, talking about banning certain firearms, that's a much more difficult place to start or to go. So if you want this coalition advancing legislation that can get stuff done, all that stuff up front, universal background checks and the rest that we can do to make sure that people who shouldn't have guns don't get them, that's where our focus has to be.
I am going to pause to share the news with everybody. Speaker Pelosi on the floor of the House has said that she will not seek re-election to Democratic leadership in the next Congress. She said, quote, "Time for a new generation to lead the Democratic caucus that I so deeply respect." So we are having some wholesale change on Capitol Hill coming up, well, at least on the House side. I wonder if you think new leadership, even given the obvious tensions and divisions right now, creates a different kind of possibility?
Jessica, it does. And that's a great point. Let me expand on that. Let me first just say, when I went to Congress, I opposed Speaker Pelosi on virtually everything. I have so grown to admire and respect her. What a giant and what a leader. And again, my own 2 cents, as Donald Trump attacked our Constitution and our democracy every day when he was president, Nancy Pelosi so strongly defended both. A historic speaker, she will be missed. But yes, a new generation of democratic leadership, I think is really important, because when it comes to issues like guns and issues of gender and issues of climate, these are issues that young voters really, really care about. And a younger generation of leaders, Jessica, I think, will more aggressively reflect those concerns.
Interesting. You mentioned gun owners who are also fed up sometimes with the NRA. Can we talk a little bit about the NRA? Because they are definitely demonized / celebrated, and there might be some more nuance there. You know, a lot of the coverage of the NRA is that members of Congress are in their pocket. Is that your view, or is this also informed by well-intentioned disagreements that the NRA, like other groups, funds candidates that agree with its views? / does the NRA push people to take more hardline views, meaning members of Congress, than they might otherwise be inclined to take?
Jessica, it's a great question. I'm going to give you a lousy answer. Yes, on all the above. No, I'm sorry.
Right.
Look, when you are a member of Congress, lobbying groups that agree with where you are on the issue support you. So I was a member of the NRA, and yes, generally, any lawmaker who is a member of the NRA or advances their agenda somewhat bows to them. No doubt about that. Lawmakers on my side of the aisle, Jessica, historically really danced to the NRA's tune. That has dramatically changed. I'm not the only right-wing gun owner who has left the NRA. Right. Millions of Americans have, because I think, Jessica, they're fed up, we're fed up with the fact that the NRA pushes back on everything. You and I talked about, common sense stuff like expanding and strengthening background checks, gun permits. The NRA purposely doesn't want to let the camel's nose under any of those tents, because they believe if you give an inch, forget it, every gun in America is going to be banned. And a while ago, many legislators believed that. Not so much anymore, which is why I think a lot of gun owners have kind of recoiled against the NRA's mission the last few years and are looking for something different.
Well, it's interesting. You look at what just happened after the Uvalde shooting. There, it was impossible to get any gun legislation through Congress at all. Now, gun legislation did get through Congress. I don't think those members who voted for that experienced blowback. That wasn't it wasn't a dangerous vote for them in the end, it would seem. Does that mean that there are other pieces of legislation that we view as controversial, but might not be if they were pushed?
Yes.
If the circumstances were right, maybe.
Yeah, and Jessica, remember, even the bipartisan piece of legislation this past year, which was just barely a start, the NRA opposed. But it was a bipartisan piece of legislation. And as you said, many Republicans supported it, not fearing the wrath of the NRA. I think that reflects the uniqueness of this environment we're in.
Right.
And I want to emphasize this, Jessica. It's not just Democratic gun owners and centrist gun owners, moderate and Democrat politically. I speak every day, week, and month with real conservative gun owners like myself. I mean, real strong defenders of the Second Amendment. I can't tell you the number of conversations with these folks I've had over the last 2 or 3 years, fed up with the NRA.
Mm-hmm.
For blocking any attempt to strengthen background checks, for even blocking a discussion of the fact, like in Texas and some states around the country, you can be 18 or 19 years old and walk into a store and buy a gun without any background check, without or get your hands on a gun without any sort of permit, without any sort of training. The NRA pushes back against all of that. And 8 to 10 years ago, Republican legislators wouldn't have gone there, Jessica, but they're going there now.
So I guess first I want to tell people we are waiting for Congressman Moulton and Congresswoman Dean, who are on the floor for Speaker Pelosi's announcement and are headed back now and will be joining us shortly. I also want to let folks know that we are not taking questions, but I know they're going to answer your questions in the course of this conference. Congressman Walsh, let's go back to something you said, which was that, let me reframe this. I know I followed your career. I remember when you were kind of a take the gun out of my cold dead hands type of gun owner, right?
Yes.
And then you engage with dialogue with people like David Hogg, and you've talked about the need for dialogue on guns. I've now heard you say that you support background checks and maybe even raising the age for some guns. For gun ownership. Do you also support red flag laws? And what was the shift in you that you think groups like 97% can pursue to build on that space so that the voices of these common sense gun owners that you're talking about are reflected in the vote and the policies of the people in Congress?
Like a lot of right-wing gun owners like me, Jessica, and I was the one. If you'd have told me 5-6 years ago, I'd be sitting down with you and 97%, and I'd be on the board of this organization trying to push reasonable reform, I would have said, you're smoking something. You're crazy, Jessica. What changed? Like a lot of responsible gun owners on the right, the rash of mass shootings and criminals engaging in bad behavior with guns really started to give gun owners a real bad name. And I've heard this from other gun owners on the right. Most gun owners don't do that. Most gun owners don't act that way. And then, Jessica, as you said, a year or two ago, I started to engage in dialogue with people like David Hogg and Fred Guttenberg, who lost his daughter in the shooting in Florida. And I tried to see where we could find common ground. David Hogg and Joe Walsh sitting down. And you know what, Jessica? David Hogg and Joe Walsh found some reasonable common ground where they can agree on things. And again, it was this sweet spot of coming together to do what we can to prevent bad people from getting guns.
Thank you. Congressman Seth Moulton joining us. Congressman, thank you so much for your time today, and what a momentous experience you must have just had. Do you mind saying hello and letting us know what you just witnessed?
Yeah, sure. No, great to see all of you. Joe, pleasure to be on with you, and thanks very much. It's always an honor to speak on such an important issue. I'm sorry I'm late. I just came from the House floor where Speaker Pelosi announced that she's stepping down from House leadership. She's going to continue to represent San Francisco, she said, but she's going to step down from House leadership to allow a new generation of leaders to step up, which is something I've been fighting for a while. I think it'll be wonderful for our caucus and our country. And so she's been an absolutely remarkable speaker, truly a historic speaker, someone who broke glass ceilings, stories that I'm proud to tell my daughters. She set a remarkable example, but we have a lot of great Democratic leaders, and I also think it's exciting to turn the page and allow some new people to lead for our party and our country.
Absolutely. A lot of change on Capitol Hill right now. Speaker Pelosi
Yes.
and also control of the House. The election just created a divided Congress. And as you think about your work with 97% and their goals, how do you think legislation, gun safety, gun legislation will fare in the coming Congress? And are there spaces for agreement on issues that have majority support among the American public to push them forward in this new environment?
Well, the hope, of course, is that a divided Congress, a closely divided Congress, will be fertile ground for getting things done in a bipartisan way, because frankly, it's probably the only way that things will get done. Now, if we dive into the details a bit more, the story is more complicated. Kevin McCarthy is going to have difficulty getting elected speaker because so many people on the far right of the Republican Party are against him and against any sort of bipartisan compromise. They don't mind digging in their heels and watching the place burn down around them to get their way. And that's different than the left side of our caucus, which they fight hard. They sometimes pull us to the left, but usually they're able to come to an agreement with the majority of Democrats at the end of the day. So what does this mean? It means that one of the only ways I think that a Speaker McCarthy, if he is so elected, will be able to pass a lot of basic legislation is to find ways to bring Democrats in, because he may never get the votes of the far right of his caucus on certain things. That, of course, is the opportunity. But on the other hand, he recognizes that as increasing numbers of the Republican Party buy into the far right ideology, he needs them to retain his speakership. And so he may be reluctant to take on issues that the far right is opposed to, like gun safety legislation. And that means it could be a tough road ahead. So, my hope is that he will be forced essentially to work with Democrats, and this could be a great area of exactly that kind of cooperation. But I wouldn't get too optimistic just yet.
Yeah, he's in a tricky. You want to weigh in on that, Congressman Walsh?
Yeah, I would just like to say, Seth, it's great to see you. Thank you for everything you've done. Nancy Pelosi has been a giant, but you rightly and aptly said, a new generation of Democratic leaders like you, young man, like you.
No, not me, but
I know. But what I was going to say, Jessica, to Seth was, and I'm older than Seth, I'm a dark Irishman, and I know Kevin McCarthy well. Kevin McCarthy will probably be speaker, but in reality, Marjorie Taylor Greene will be speaker. I think that's what you're looking at these next 2 years.
Would you just tease that out for a moment for folks who don't understand why you believe the far right has more influence in a divided Congress rather than the possibility of working across the aisle? Why is that where you go?
And Seth can jump in. It's a smaller caucus. They'll have a very slim majority, thereby giving, pardon my language, the crazier aspects of their caucus more sway. For McCarthy to become speaker, he's got to cut deals with the Marjorie Taylor Greenes and the Lauren Boeberts. And we've already seen a lot of that. Seth, while you were doing historic stuff, my former colleagues, Jim Jordan, they were out there talking about investigating Hunter Biden. These are the things that Kevin McCarthy has signed off on. Marjorie Taylor Greene will have Kevin McCarthy by the short hairs, and he knows that.
Congressman Moulton, let me ask you some specifics, because you held open the possibility for some agreement. We always have to be optimistic and try. But let's talk about where. You're a veteran, you're a 97% advisory board member, and you've talked about the weapons you used in Iraq and that they're not weapons people should have here at home. But for example, a ban on assault weapons has only 34% support of gun owners. So do you think it's possible to change which weapons are allowed legally in people's hands on an issue like that? Or is it more productive for Congress to now focus on what the stuff where there seems to be more agreement, red flag laws, changing background check provisions? Where's the most area of common agreement?
Well, actually, the amazing work of 97% is figuring out exactly where that common agreement is, because we can all agree in principle that we don't need weapons of war on our streets. I carried an assault weapon. I use it every day. I don't think that citizens in America should have to be walking around with assault rifles. I don't think you need to have an assault rifle to shoot a deer. Frankly, if you feel you need one, you probably need a shooting lesson, not an assault rifle. But look, you're right that we don't have the political constituency right now to support that view and to get that kind of law passed. So let's focus on the places where we do have agreement. And that's exactly what 97% is all about, finding places where we can bring gun owners together with those who on both sides of the aisle want to see some reasonable laws passed, and find things like red flag laws where there's broader agreement that can save lives. So that's ultimately what we should do. And if you're someone who's just a diehard assault rifle ban person, recognize that the ultimate goal here is to save lives. So let's find places where we can make progress, because we can talk all we want about assault rifle bans, but if we can't get one passed into law, it's not going to do any good.
So let me just follow that up with, if we have 97% support in this country for background checks, why don't we have them?
Well, Joe, you might be better at answering that than me.
I would say, Jessica, it's because my side, the right, gun owners on the right, haven't been leading the charge for expanding background checks. 97% is a really big step to get that, to put that out there. But as long as it's perceived as the Democrats are advancing universal background checks, it's going to be a tougher lift. I think there's a great opportunity. And Seth, before you came on, I was talking about the fact that a lot of gun owners have just had it, people like me with the NRA. I think the key here is to take a lot of the research that 97% is putting out there, showing where there's common ground, and then somehow there's got to be a lobbying competitor to the NRA to give these gun owners a place, who are fed up with the NRA, a place to voice. And if they can lead, if people on the right, gun owners on the right can lead, I think there's a better shot to advance this stuff.
Well,
I think that's absolutely right, Joe.
Go ahead. Do you have more?
Well, I think that is the solution here. And look, we've tried things in the past, like just having Democrats pass laws, they get undone by the next Republican Congress. We've tried having lawmakers lead on this. That hasn't worked because there's a sense that gun owners can't trust lawmakers. But we know that so many gun owners want these kinds of sensible reforms. Look, they don't want their kids to die in a school shooting either. And so the more that we can cooperate with them and actually let them lead this fight, the better off we're going to be. That's the way to get real change. That's exactly what 97% is doing. And that's why I'm so proud to be a part of this team.
Thank you. I'd like to take a moment and welcome Congresswoman Madeleine Dean for joining us. Congresswoman, thank you for being here. We understand you witnessed some history on the floor of the House just now. And I wonder if you would join this conversation by commenting on what you think is possible in the next Congress, given that it's both divided and now, as we see today, going to see some real change.
Well, thank you for having me, Jessica, and 97%. And I'm delighted to be here with my colleagues. Nice to see you, Congressman Walsh. Great to see you, Seth. Saw you this morning. I want to start by saying thank you to 97% for the work that you are doing. And if you don't mind, a little full disclosure, my own daughter-in-law, Stephanie Gennardi Canan, works with 97%. She is excellent. She is passionate. She's a talented writer and researcher. And so sorry, Stephanie, I had to do that. But she and I have cared about this issue forever. And so when she said she was coming to work with 97% to understand what gun owners want around the curbing and stopping of gun violence, I just am very proud to be associated with you in this way. So I think there are things that we can do. Number one, maybe you've already discussed this. I apologize for coming late. I did not want to miss the moment on the floor to be a part of that history. What an honor to serve with Nancy Pelosi. And frankly, where we've come with the shepherding of the Speaker, the Safer Communities Act. Maybe you've already discussed that, but that was an extraordinary breakthrough. The first time in 30 years that Congress did something about gun violence and did some substantive things. Not enough. I think there's more to do, but that was a huge substantive bill that will save lives, whether it's through community intervention investment, interrupters in communities, how we know that actually works, working on mental health and all the rest. So I think there's more work to be done. We're obviously going to step into a different role here in a very slim minority in the new year, but there's still more work to be done. I'm wearing my orange scarf that I wore the day that with John Lewis, we walked out arm in arm. Remember, Seth, the day that we passed background checks, universal background checks back in the last Congress, in the 116th. It was a remarkable day, even though we knew the Senate would not do anything with it. That is something we have to pursue, universal background checks.
So let's follow up on that. Congresswoman Dean, what is it, in your view, that got the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act over the finish line?
I think it was a lot of hard years of work, number one. It was Democrats in the majority. I came to the House in January of 19 and begged to be on the Judiciary Committee for this very issue. And Jerry Nadler, chair, his very first hearing that Congress was on gun violence. So we kept beating the drum that we have to do something about this scourge of gun violence. Sadly, what I think actually was the final thing was actually the massacre in Buffalo and Uvalde. I happened to be in Europe when Uvalde happened. And person after person, leader after leader just looked at us with such remorse and such sorrow, but also such bafflement that America can't get its arms around this man-made problem, this uniquely American problem. So when we came back, and we'd been pushing, many individual members and caucuses had been pushing. I give Mike Thompson a lot of credit in the Gun Violence Prevention Task Force that we're all a part of, Lucy McBath. So it was a steady work, a stream of work, and then more and more horrific massacres that finally put that set of bills over the top in both the Senate and the House. Maybe Seth, you have a better sense of it than that.
No, I think that's exactly right. And we were talking before you came on, Madeleine, about how we build the broader coalition to pass future laws, to do it in a way that not only would get through the Senate, but won't be undone if it's passed under Democrats, but then Republicans come to power or whatnot. And just the value of having gun owners actually lead this debate when so many gun owners are in favor of many of these changes. And that's exactly what 97% is doing. I think that there's a bright future ahead. The other question we tackled, though, is whether any of this will happen under Kevin McCarthy. I think there's the potential for bipartisan agreement because he's not going to have his own caucus together. But the likelihood that we take on contentious issues like this, I think, is rather slim.
We are the United States, and plenty of action happens in the states. So I'm wondering, Congressman Moulton, do you think this is a moment to turn to state legislatures and lobby state legislatures for action and then sort of drive it up to Congress over time?
Well, it could be. I mean, there are a lot of laws that originate at the state, and then eventually get adopted at the federal level. I'm proudly from Massachusetts. We passed universal health care under a Republican governor, under Governor Romney. And that really served as a model for Obamacare across the nation. So that absolutely can happen. And we also know that states that have tougher gun laws have lower gun violence. That's just a fact. I mean, I feel a little bit safer with my kids in Massachusetts schools, knowing that the chances of a gun massacre there, while not zero, are lower than they are in other states in the union. So I do think that there's a model there that we might be able to follow. You have to get through a lot of opposition rhetoric, though. And it is certainly true that Massachusetts can have tough gun laws, but you can still go to New Hampshire and buy a gun more easily and bring it across the border. That's very true, but we've got to make sure people know the fact that that state by state, these measures do make a difference. I don't know. What do you think, Joe?
Well, I agree with Seth, but Jessica, I'd add a couple wrinkles, and I agreed with everything Congresswoman Dean said. The final little piece we talked about that helped get that bipartisan piece of legislation passed this year was there was just enough Republican support that told the NRA to go get lost. There were that little piece was there enough to help get it passed. I think there's an opening here to pass federal legislation, not at the state level. Most gun owners rightly consider, obviously, my right to keep and bear arms to be a constitutional right. The federal government should protect that right. And we live in a country now where the issues of reciprocity are confusing. You live in one state, you go to another state, you can't carry your gun, whatever. This, I think, presents a real opening for gun owners to support universal background checks at the federal level, gun permitting laws at the federal level, red flag laws at the federal level, because a lot of gun owners believe as a constitutional right, that's where this legislation should be.
So let me just stop here and say, one of the things I do professionally is I call my thing news, not noise, because I just distill what's really going on in the news landscape and make it basic. And I think what I'm hearing everybody say is there's overwhelming agreement in the American public on a lot of reforms that could be extremely beneficial. But because of capture in Congress, and because a certain part of Congress is extreme on this issue, it's impossible or very hard to get stuff through. That means there's an opportunity to create change, right? How do you make the majority get heard? There's a couple ways to go at this. One is strategic, talking about which legislative pieces could move. The thing we haven't talked about is communications, how we talk about these issues. And I wonder, starting with you, Congressman Walsh, because you're an amazing communicator. I follow you on social media. You all are, but I mean, like, he's got the social media thing that goes on. What is the biggest messaging mistake advocates of gun reform make when they're pushing for these issues? Communication mistake.
Even hinting at banning certain firearms, coming for your guns, going after legal law-abiding gun owners. The NRA and people on the right who have no interest in working on this, they will take any snippet and then just blow it up, and it's on Tucker Carlson or Sean Hannity that night. One Democratic member of Congress suggested maybe this, and Sean Hannity will say this is where the Democratic Party is, and then the Republicans resist. So it's that. So the opening is, and Seth and the congressman and the congresswoman here and the left side has been doing great work pushing these issues. If you want to get my side with you, and I know you do, and we want to be with you, focus on just being in your face about doing all we can to stop people who shouldn't have guns from getting guns. Focus on the upfront reforms before a gun can be bought. That's where everybody is.
And could I add to that?
Yeah.
The very work that you're doing and that your research reveals is what we have to communicate. We have to not be us against gun owners. I'm not. My son is a gun owner. I went shooting with him. I've been to gun shows. We have to say, we have to communicate better that gun owners, as your research reveals, cares about this. And to the point Joe just made, that gun owners care about violent people having guns, those who should not have guns having guns. They know that it will make a serious difference, and it will not interfere with their legal gun ownership. I think we have a job to do to communicate the very things you are learning through your research.
Hey, Jessica, Madeleine's right. Part of the problem is not the message, the messenger. And that's another opportunity here, because I really do believe the vast majority of gun owners right now are done with the NRA. They're pissed off at the NRA. These people have to be lead messengers, right? I mean, right-wing gun nuts like me have to be lead messengers to really get this stuff pushed.
Congressman Moulton, do you think there's a shift in language you'd advocate for from the Democratic Party, or a message that you find you're able to communicate as somebody who's carried an assault weapon that other folks need to understand?
Well, look, fundamentally, the reason why I'm here is because of that background, because I'm not just one of many Democrats who advocates for gun reform. I'm someone who has a bit of credibility in doing so because I've used guns a lot. And that's what we need, is we need people who, just like Joe says, can actually be trusted on this issue. I remember when I was much younger, I was in the Marines, and I was just looking at an article in the paper about gun reform. And there was a press conference pictured there, and a Democrat was at the podium with a display of assault rifles to her left. And just looking at this picture, I, as a Marine, said, well, she's got an M16 there with the safety off. Now, that's just like a basic violation of firearm safety, but she probably didn't notice it because she probably didn't know anything about guns. So that's what we have to change, is we have to show that we can lead on this issue with people who have real credibility on it. That's where gun owners come in. That's where, people like Madeleine from a swing district in Pennsylvania who, represent a lot of gun owners. But most especially, it's people like Joe who represent the right side and can say, look, I use guns. I like guns. You can trust me on this. These are reasonable things that we should do. It's not the left pulling the wool over our eyes. This is sensible Americans coming together to do the right thing for our country.
Amen.
Congresswoman Dean, what do you think is needed to build a gun owner coalition to get gun owners advocating for change?
Well, I guess you're already beginning that. And from your research, I see how few gun owners are actually associated with NRA and other groups like that. So we have to just beat through that noise, as you pointed out, that NRA owns this issue and therefore owns politicians around it. I think we have to keep building relationships to the point of trust. I know when I have conversations around this, I have to get the people to trust me, that I'm not some lunatic who just wants to take the Second Amendment out of our Constitution, that I actually just want to do something about protecting lives. I'm sure you started this with the devastating numbers, and they're on the increase. When 45,000 people die a year, 54% of those are suicide. I think that's a place where we can all work together to say this is an area where we have a chance to save lives that are at risk of gun violence, suicide. When children are, the leading cause of death among children has, as a result of 2020 and so many deaths, 4,400 kids died. Parents, mothers, and others have to come to the table. And as you say, with gun owners, to say that we have the chance to do something about this. This is a man-made problem. Therefore, men, and I say men, meaning men and women, the universal man, can and have a responsibility to do something. But it is to tamp back against that threat, that chronic argument of slippery slope. You're just coming for my guns. We're not. We just want to save lives.
You said it was key to first build trust with gun owners. Can you tease out just for a moment how you do that?
I've done it in town halls. I've had these arguments where people come to me and they take one look at me, middle-aged white lady, never probably saw a gun. And so that's why you're so on this issue of gun violence. And I've actually just built relationships one-to-one with gun owners to say what my ambition is in this area. It's just not to challenge their ownership, not to challenge their love of sport and hunting or self-protection. But it takes conversations, and it takes not speaking at people. It doesn't always work. I'm not blowing smoke here. There are some times that I wind up not succeeding in building trust. But I do want to say 97% helps me. You're arming me with important data and understanding of gun owners that I can help, I can try to relate to.
And Jessica, with your communications background, that kind of moment that Madeleine's describing at a town hall, that is beautiful. And that should have been that 30-second or 1-minute clip with a constituent, an honest, respectful 1-minute or 2-minute dialogue. That should have been captured on video. And that's the kind of thing that needs to get out there. I know I'm a broken record on this. When I was in the House, Republicans were much more beholden to the NRA. And just a few short years later, that relationship has really changed. And there is an opportunity here to do something.
Congressman Moulton, do you think, given what Congressman Walsh just said, that the left, often demonizes legislators who have the backing of the NRA as corrupt and extremists? Do you think that's a messaging mistake by folks on the left? Is there a way to talk about how there might be some agreement with even folks who are backed by the NRA, or is that a necessary way to frame the conversation?
Well, look, I think it sounds good to our base, but ultimately, if we want to work with people, then we can't demonize them. It doesn't work very well to attack the person that you're trying to strike a deal with. So I think we've got to be cognizant of that. And in some ways, that's the role that we have to play as members of Congress, is to not just respond to and repeat the most vicious rhetoric on these issues, but build the trust that we need across the aisle or with gun owners to actually get things done. My own experience with this started, I think, in the Marines, where I remember serving with someone who would absolutely describe himself quite regularly as a gun nut. And he was from West Virginia, I think, thick accent, owned quite an arsenal at home. And when he first met me as a Harvard-educated lieutenant from Massachusetts, he pretty much knew where I was on guns and didn't want to have much of a conversation. But we were on deployment together. And as we got talking more into the details of all this and the different laws that have been passed and what works and what doesn't, he would get to the point where he would open up and say, to be honest, like, here are some reasonable changes that you really should make. They passed this law that doesn't make any sense, but if you did this, it would make a difference. And it was only after developing that level of trust with him that we could have those conversations. And then here he was, this gun nut, giving me this was long before I was in Congress, of course. And by the way, I had no intention of running for Congress or any other office at that point. But here was he giving me, from Massachusetts, some suggestions on better gun safety laws because he understood the issue so well, but more importantly, because he actually trusted me to have that conversation. So I do think that we've got to be conscious of the fact that the left has been railing about guns, railing against the right on this issue for decades. And what has it gotten us? Not much. Let's try a different approach.
This organization calls itself 97%, and the name comes from the 97% of Americans who say they favor universal background checks. And yet only 22 states and DC have background checks. So when we think about what should be advanced in Congress, whether it can get done or not, but because you need to keep pushing, is this the central piece of legislation, Congresswoman Dean, that should be advanced? Is there a more popular piece of legislation? What else would you like to see on the agenda?
I do hope and believe that universal background checks can come forward. Maybe not in this next set of months, but in another era. And I want to give a shout out to Pennsylvania. I was a Pennsylvania legislator, served in the House for 6 years. And of course, you're aware of the NIC system, the National Instant Check System. Pennsylvania has one beyond that, the PIC system, the Pennsylvania Instant Check System, which is run by the state police. And it is a greater background check system. Instead of the default after 3 days, if you can't get clarity on a background check, The PIC system under our law in Pennsylvania allows for 10 days to try to get clarity. And we all know that most background checks go through very, very fast, but allows 10 days and a default to no. Instead of 3 days, we can't figure it out, default, yes. The Charleston loophole, that kind of thing. And so, yes, I think universal background checks and getting grants to states, that's what I have legislation for, so that they could enlist this extra layer of background checks that is very effective in keeping guns out of the hands of prohibited purchasers. I think that is very relevant. The other thing that I think is possible is work around ghost guns. Police department after police department tells us of the increasing number of ghost guns found at the scenes of crimes. Sadly, too often in the hands of minors, children prohibited from owning these guns. So I think anything that we can do around background checks, universal and stronger, and ghost guns and the illegal guns in children's hands. That trend is so incredibly troubling. And I think gun owners and non-gun owners care about those.
Congressman Moulton, of those, are there specific policies that you think have the most bipartisan support? Let's for a moment leave aside the bizarre politics of this moment that might make it difficult to pass in the next 6 months or more.
Well, I think here's a trade-off. A lot of research has shown that there's no more effective way to reduce gun violence than by having universal background checks. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. You have to pass a driving test to drive a vehicle. You ought to have to get some basic checks on your background to make sure it's safe before you buy a firearm. But the reality, the political reality, is that we're probably not going to get that through because there's not as much bipartisan consensus in Congress on this issue. So this may be one that's better pursued at the state level through the great example that Madeleine just gave from the state of Pennsylvania. It got me thinking, I wonder if Massachusetts has a system as good as PICS, even though we do have really strong, reasonable gun laws in general. But in Congress, I think a good place to start is the red flag laws, because that's a place that we have gotten consensus. It has made a difference. I think that that can form a baseline for saying, this is a place that we can come to agreement. And in some ways, you can understand how if we can pass some red flag laws, which do sort of the same thing as universal background checks, we can build more comfort amongst everybody that we could do gun safety background checks, whatever you want to call them, in a more bipartisan way, in a way that people feel like it's not just going to attack gun owners, that if you're a law-abiding citizen, you're not going to have any trouble buying a gun. These are the kinds of assurances that ultimately we have to give to the other side in order to get these laws through.
Would you remind us?
You agree with that, Joe? I'd love to. You correct me if I'm wrong here.
No, Seth, I completely agree, and I would only add this: most gun owners, even most gun owners on the right, they believe that this should be dealt with at the federal level because they believe it's a federal right, it's a constitutional right. So, absolutely, amen. Work state by state if you can, but there's an opening with gun owners to advance federal background checks and federal red flag laws.
Congressman Moulton, would you mind reminding us, or Dean, red flag laws were almost part of the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, the measure that just passed, but it fell out of the deal. I don't remember. I was reporting on it. I don't remember why. What's the fundamental disagreement, and how do you get over that hump in the future?
Madeleine, do you remember exactly why it fell out?
I don't know where that fell out, whether it was
Okay.
over in the Senate. I'm looking at my notes and I don't recall.
But
I'll
is
get
it
to the answer.
basically a concern that there'll be state overreach to claw guns away from people who want to keep their guns? Is that the concern on the right?
That's fundamentally it. I mean, that you're going to assault the rights of law-abiding citizens. That I could, call someone up and tell them to take the guns away from Joe just because I don't like Joe, and not because he's actually a threat. And developing the frameworks for these laws to be implemented not just effectively but fairly is important. And I do think this is another place where states can serve as a model, a testing ground for these laws, even though Joe's right. There is an appetite to do this at the federal level. And fundamentally, of course, this should be done at the federal level. This is something that so many Americans agree with.
And the arguments that we heard in Judiciary Committee, for example, was the worry of overreach and due process and those kinds of things. And I know from your research, I think the people you're talking to, the gun owners you're talking to, want some other layer of protection, a fine against someone who falsely brings a claim that's one is a risk to himself or others. So I think there's work to be done there. We know the risk with domestic violence if there is a gun in the home. So I think there's work to be done. Family members, the need for family members or professionals to be able to come forward and offer these things. So we've talked about states to grants to states who want to develop these programs. But there's more we can do in the crafting of it to get more buy-in.
There's also the experience in other issues where when the states come up with a successful policy, then the federal government can adopt that. So more red flag laws in states that are applied fairly provides proof that Congress can then act on, which is what everybody here is trying to work on. Congressman Walsh, we're almost out of time and I want to have everybody have a chance to say their final thoughts. But, one thing we haven't addressed is I looked just coming out of campaign season at how many ads on the right for no reason featured random elected officials shooting at things with loads of weapons, right? And standing in front of Christmas trees with their 2-year-olds carrying assault weapon, whatever it is. What is the left missing in this conversation about what guns stand for in that space? And how do you push through that to say, we're not taking that, whatever it is, freedom, independence away from you. We just want to be safe.
Well, like so much else in my former political party, there is a radicalized element on the gun issue. I'm every bit as strong of a Second Amendment gun person as Marjorie Taylor Greene is. I couldn't imagine myself ever having a campaign ad like that. But that's not where most Republicans are. And it's certainly not at all where most gun owners on the right are. That's Gun Owners of America, a more radical gun group than the NRA and where the NRA might be. But remember, a lot of Republicans and a lot of gun owners on the right, like me, no longer want anything to do with those groups, which is why there's an opening here.
Great. In our last 45 seconds, I just want to ask Congresswoman Dean, do you have any message you'd like to leave this group with?
Something that I learned early on in this that always impresses me in a sad way, but maybe it's an opportunity to do work, which is, as I said, of the 45,000 people who died in 2020 of guns, 54% were suicide. It's always to me a stunning number. We have had friends lose their children to suicide by gun. So I think that's an area of extraordinary opportunity. We know we lose vets every single day to gun violence, suicide. And so I think maybe if we could work in that area in a very concerted and a very unified way to make a difference, to keep guns out of the hands of people who might be at that kind of risk, invest in mental health. That's something I'm trying to be a part of.
And Congressman Moulton, last word to you.
Well, I'll pick up on that. I mean, this is exactly why I passed the 988 bill to establish a nationwide 3-digit hotline for mental health issues. It's already seen call volume go up 40% since we finally got it implemented this past summer. It was a bipartisan bill, and it's a great example, a great model for what we have to do here. There were no big victory parades. There were no big celebrations. There was a lot of just behind the scenes hard work to grind this through Congress, to get it signed by a Republican president, despite a lot of conservative opposition to doing anything on mental health. And it's saving a lot of lives. That's exactly what we're trying to do through 97%. Don't expect a victory parade. Don't expect some moment of glory. Just know that you're supporting the hard behind the scenes work, the tough grind that it takes to save lives, but it's sure worth it.
Well, thanks to all of you so very much for your time today. I think we're living through a time of profound change. And after this election, we understand that Americans are asking for less extremism and more getting stuff done. And that's what 97% exists to do. So thank you, everyone.